When my mother-in-law demanded I move out so her other son could take my home, I was speechless. She had no clue I was the one paying the $5,600 rent, not her son. I didn't fight back. I simply packed my bags to leave forever. But as I turned to go, her smugness vanished instantly. She grabbed my arm, sobbing and trembling, suddenly terrified of who might move in next. The morning silence was shattered abruptly. I was still in my pajamas, sipping coffee, when my mother-in-law barged through the front door without knocking. She marched straight into the kitchen with a look of pure determination on her face. Before I could even ask what was wrong, the metal clattered loudly against the stone surface. Sarah sat frozen at the kitchen table, while Linda slammed a set of keys onto the granite counter. Linda did not wait for me to speak before she started making her demands. She crossed her arms and stared down at me with a cold, hard expression. She explained that her other son, Jason, needed a place to stay immediately. It didn't matter to her that I lived there or that my husband was away on business. Linda told Sarah that she expected her to vacate the property by the end of the week. Most people would have argued back or tried to explain the lease agreement. I knew that fighting with Linda usually led to nowhere but a headache. Instead of shouting, I chose to maintain my composure in the face of her rudeness. I stood up slowly from the table, ignoring her glaring eyes. Sarah quietly picked up her coffee mug and placed it in the sink without saying a word. I decided right then that I was done playing these games with my husband's family. If they wanted the house so badly, I would let them deal with the consequences later. I left the kitchen and headed straight for the master suite. There was no hesitation in my movements as I prepared for my departure. She walked to her bedroom and pulled 3 large suitcases from the top shelf of the closet. My mother-in-law was clearly confused by my lack of resistance. She expected a fight, not immediate compliance with her ridiculous demands. I could hear her footsteps trailing behind me as I moved around the room. She leaned against the doorframe, her eyes scanning every item I touched. Linda followed her down the hallway and watched closely as Sarah began folding her clothes into piles. I spent the rest of the night packing boxes and making urgent phone calls. By the time the sun came up, everything was ready for transport. A large truck pulled into the driveway just as the neighborhood was waking up. 2 men in uniforms hopped out and immediately got to work. The moving crew arrived the next morning and started loading the heavy furniture into the large truck. The house emptied out much faster than I thought it would. The movers were efficient, clearing out the living room and dining area in record time. Once the truck was full, the foreman approached me to finalize the transaction. I reached into my bag to retrieve the payment I had prepared. Sarah handed the lead mover a check for his services and signed the paperwork on his clipboard. My mother-in-law finally stepped out of her vehicle to inspect her victory. She walked up the driveway with a spring in her step that I hadn't seen in years. It was clear she felt like she had won a major battle against me. She did not even try to hide her satisfaction as the house became bare. Linda stood on the front porch and smiled as the movers took the sofa through the doorway. I needed to make sure I left absolutely nothing behind for them to use. My goal was to leave the house exactly as I found it, which was empty. I did one final sweep of the downstairs area before heading out. The granite countertops were bare, and the pantry shelves were stripped clean. Sarah walked into the kitchen to double-check the empty cabinets for any items she might have missed. The echo in the house was a stark reminder that this chapter was over. I stood in the center of the kitchen one last time. Linda was waiting by the front door, tapping her foot impatiently. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small metal ring. She placed her house keys on the granite counter and picked up her purse to finally leave. I stopped near the entryway to give Linda one final piece of information. Since I had canceled the lease, the owner was wasting no time in making improvements. I told her casually that a team was coming to dig up the garden. Sarah mentioned that the landlord hired a landscaping crew to completely renovate the backyard later that afternoon. The color drained from my mother-in-law's face the moment the words left my mouth. Her smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of absolute horror. I turned to walk down the steps, but she lunged forward. She caught me with a grip that was surprisingly strong for her age. Linda froze in the doorway and grabbed Sarah's arm tightly before she could step off the porch. I tried to pull away, but she would not let go of me. Her eyes darted frantically past me toward the rear of the property. It seemed like she was seeing a ghost in the daylight. She began mumbling something incoherent while staring at the yard. The older woman looked toward the flower beds near the back fence and started shaking her head violently. Linda acted as if the landscaping crew was already there with shovels. She yanked me backward with a force that nearly made me stumble. Before I could protest, she slammed the heavy wooden door shut. She fumbled with the deadbolt, trying to secure us inside the empty house. She pulled Sarah back inside the house and quickly locked the front door with trembling hands. I asked her what was wrong, but she was hyperventilating. She paced the hallway, wringing her hands and looking at the back window. Finally, she shouted the reason for her sudden hysteria. She said the landscaping had to be stopped immediately. Linda screamed that nobody could dig in the specific spot Mark had warned her never to touch, terrified that new tenants might landscape the garden and uncover it. My husband had never mentioned anything about the garden to me. The way Linda was reacting made it clear this wasn't just about sentimental plants. I let my bag slide off my shoulder and hit the hardwood. I needed answers before I took another step. Sarah dropped her purse on the floor and demanded that Linda explain her sudden change in behavior. Linda ignored my question and continued her frantic movements. She looked like a trapped animal trying to find a way out. She kept peeking through the slats of the blinds, scanning the street for the landscapers. It was obvious she was paranoid about being seen. Linda paced around the living room while checking the window blinds to see if anyone was watching. Since she wouldn't speak, I decided to investigate the source of her fear. I walked past her and headed straight for the glass sliding door. The yard looked normal at first glance, but then I saw it. There was an area in the corner that looked uneven. Sarah walked to the back door and looked out at the patch of disturbed earth near the fence. I remembered leaving a few tools in the laundry area for the movers. I wasn't going to wait for the landscapers to find whatever it was. My curiosity outweighed my fear in that moment. I went to the small closet and found what I needed. She grabbed a shovel from the utility room and marched toward the garden to see for herself. As soon as Linda saw the tool in my hand, she shrieked. She scrambled out the back door, tripping over her own feet to catch me. She threw herself in front of me, spreading her arms wide. Tears were streaming down her face as she pleaded with me. Linda ran after her and physically blocked the path to the garden while begging her to stop. I was done listening to her lies and excuses. I sidestepped her frantic attempts to hold me back. I slammed the blade of the shovel into the soft dirt. It only took a few forceful digs before I heard a loud clank. Sarah pushed past her mother-in-law and struck the earth with the shovel until it hit something metal. The sound of metal on metal seemed to break Linda completely. She lost all the strength in her legs and fell to the ground. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob uncontrollably. Through her tears, the truth finally spilled out. Linda collapsed onto the grass and confessed that Mark buried a safe containing his brother's stolen inheritance there. Everything suddenly made perfect sense to me. The sudden demand for the house wasn't about Jason needing a place to live. It was about accessing the backyard without my interference. Linda admitted that they had planned this eviction carefully. She explained that Jason needed to move in so they could retrieve the money without Sarah knowing. I looked down at the box and then at my weeping mother-in-law. I realized that my husband was a criminal and his mother was an accomplice. There was only one thing left for me to do. I reached into my pocket, ignoring Linda's renewed pleas for silence. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed the police while standing over the hidden metal box. The authorities arrived quickly and took control of the scene. They dug up the safe and arrested Linda for her involvement. I stood on the porch, feeling a strange sense of relief as I watched them work. The moving truck had turned around and come back. She watched the officers escort Linda to a patrol car, while the movers unloaded her furniture again.